Good day. We are the team Quad Squad, and for today's discussion, we are going to discuss the chapter 4, Cognitive or Perception Theory. Presentation outline. In this discussion, we are going to discuss the topics such as Gestalt psychology, Lewin's life space, Tolman's cognitive maps, functional learning principles, cybernetic learning principles for effective communication, a run-through, and the chapter summary.
Good day, I am Mabdurul Stapel and I will be discussing the topics about Gestalt psychology and Lewin's life space under the cognitive or perception theories. Gestalt psychology. This describes the perception as an important part of learning, assumes that perception is the basis of learning and that such perception is the process by which we organize or see relationships among stimuli so that they make up a coherent whole. This tells educational communicators that effective message organization is important in learning. Gestalt psychology is about how it describes the perception as part of our learning. Under the Gestalt psychology is the perception, where it is the process of the organized relationship that makes coherent whole. Gestalt is the German word that is roughly translated as pattern or configuration, which represents the relationships among stimuli presented. Perception. It is defined as the process by which an organism interprets a stimuli that he can sense through any of his/her five senses, based on his/her previous experiences. In practical terms, perception may be equated with understanding. Ang perception ay isang proseso na kung saan in-interpret nito ang mga bagay using their five senses pero nakabase ito sa kanilang mga experiences. So there are three American scientists, that's Wertheimer, Kafka, and Kohler, who were credited in conceptualizing Gestalt psychology. And Kohler is the main contributor who based his discussion about his experiments with apes. He placed the problem in a situation where the apes learned how to reach the bananas hanging from the ceiling of their cage o kaya ay nakalagay sa labas ng kulungan nila. They learned how to deal with it and saw the relationships between objects in their surrounding. Halimbawa, natutunan ng apes na gumamit ng box para tuntungan nila yon para maabot yung saging. And another experiment ay yung maraming kahon na yung ginamit ng apes kasi, di ba kung isa lang yun, tapos mataas pa yung pinagsasabitan ng saging, hindi niya maaabot. That's why the apes use a lot of box. Another trial or experiment na about pa rin sa apes ay yung gumamit sila ng one or more stick to reach the bananas outside the cage. Such perception of relationship between the boxes or sticks and that of reaching the bananas was identical as inside. And with that, let us move on to the three groups of Gestalt principles. So these principles provide useful guidelines in organizing messages, whether verbal or nonverbal. We have the principles of weak grouping, separation, and strong grouping. The principles of weak and strong groupings tells about the tendency of receivers to put together or relate two or more stimuli presented together. In strong groupings, the stimuli became so closely related that the whole that they make up is perceived more than the individual stimuli. The principles of separation are about how we put apart two or more stimuli presented together. These principles find immediate translation in an audiovisual communication but also apply in conceptual learning. So let us start with the first group, the weak grouping. The following that I'm about to discuss is about the Gestalt principles of weak groupings. So let us start with similarity. Similarity is the tendency of a perceiver to group or associate stimuli with similar characteristics such as size, shape, color, pitch, and tempo. So similarity is about groups with similar characteristics, size, shape, color, pitch, or tempo. Just like in other words, same feather flocks together. Similarity in conceptual learning is the authors may apply these principles by putting related subtopics or concepts together or in succession. In some experiment, they found that in learning, it would be easy and fast when the materials being presented are similar than the materials that are grouped together have varying characteristics as it presenting nonsense syllables. So next is the proximity. The tendency of a perceiver to group stimuli that are presented close to each other in time or space. So the second Gestalt principle of weak grouping is the proximity, where it is being presented as too close to each other in time or space. The principle reinforces the importance of putting together in time or space related subtopics or the concepts. So the last one is the common movement. The tendency of a perceiver to group stimuli that are moving in the same direction. In audiovisual communication, movement may be real or implied. In still visuals, common movement may be implied by line or pattern. So, ang huling Gestalt principle ng weak grouping ay ang common movement. So, when we say common movement, ito yung groups of stimuli na nagmo-move in same direction, just like in the sample figure. In audiovisual communication, the movement may be real or implied kung saan ang principle ay mas direct ang applications ng designs in motion visuals, samantalang sa still visuals naman, it implies movements where it has the lines and patterns. Consistent pattern of thought may establish the related subtopics or ideas as deductive or inductive reasoning. So, let us move on with the next group of Gestalt principle, the separation. The following that I'm about to discuss is about the Gestalt principle of separation. So, let us start with figure ground. So, figure ground is the tendency of perceiver to focus one's perception on only one aspect of a mass or stimuli, the figure, at one time with the rest of the mass becoming a background ground. So, figure ground is about how the tendency of one's perception to focus on only one aspect, one at a time. This means that a person pays attention to only one or a few at one at a time, but it depends on the intensity of the relation in its surroundings or in the previous experiences of the perceiver. Isa yun sa mga rason kung bakit iba-iba ang interpretasyon ng bawat individual sa isang pangyayari. Halimbawa na lamang dito ay yung kay Andres Bonifacio, yung sa revolution niya. Iba't ibang tao ang nagsalaysay pero nasa parehas silang pangyayari. Pero iba-iba din yung naging outcome nung paraan kung paano nila isinalaysay yung mga nangyari nung panahong iyon. And each individual may focus their attention on the different aspects of the events. And using the Gestalt terms, each person has had a different figure and ground. Why? Dahil hindi nating basta-basta i-assume ang lahat ng tao ay may pare-parehong figure ground given a set of stimuli. The communicators must attempt to make their audience's perceptions uniform and similar to theirs in a way na i-emphasize nila ang mga importanteng stimuli or ideas, whether it is verbal or non-verbal. Emphasis or emphasizing is very important to have an effective communication. So, next is the contrast. The tendency of a perceiver to put apart stimuli with contrasting qualities such as contrasting size, shape, tone, color, pitch, and tempo. So, the next Gestalt principles of separation is the contrast. So when we say contrast, this is about putting apart the stimuli but with contrasting qualities like size, shapes, tone, color, pitch, and the tempo. The qualities or the properties of the concept is better appreciated when its difference from one another concept is illustrated. So moving on to the next group of Gestalt principles is the strong grouping, or it is the last principle. So, under the Gestalt principle of strong grouping, we have the following. The first one is the closure. Closure is the tendency of a perceiver to fill in gaps and complete a stimulus that is incomplete for him. So, When we say closure, it is to fill the gaps and complete the incomplete for it. Tapos, yung mga misinterpretations ay maaaring makomplete ang meaning sa receiver's mind when it's not the same as intended for the communicators. This principle points out the importance of giving the complete information in completing the message. It is important not to forget the conclusion because it is important for the communicators. Also, the conclusion restates the theme of the message and it may present as a summary. Kagaya lang baga ito nung sa isang relasyon, may mga instances na kaya hindi makamove on ng isa or kaya hindi mawala yung bigat na nararamdaman ng isa kasi walang closure. That's why closure and conclusion is very important, especially in the communicators. So let's move on to good continuity. So good continuity is the tendency to perceive another whole out of stimuli that are strung so close together with individual stimuli losing their identities. So the next Gestalt principle of strong grouping is the good continuity. So when we say good continuity, this is about the whole of the stimuli that is close together and the stimuli that is losing their identities. Halimbawa, a perceiver just sees a skyline in a city, but not individuals are making it up. This principle shows us that the stimuli, when they are relatively closely enough, they will make the whole coherent in the mind of the perceiver. So, sa isang paraang yun, para ma-unify ang isang set ng mga organized idea, ay kailangan magkaroon ng common theme. So let us move on to our next topic, which is the Lewin's life space. The psychologist considered Lewin as a gestalist. However, his theory adds another concept that has learning in educational communication, and that is the concept of life space. Lewin's life space describes human behavior and motivation. According to Lewin, each individual has a life space, a psychological world that he carries and within he moves. So life space, it consists of a person and her goals, values, wishes, attitudes, and cognitive field, as well as the environment to which he is reacting. It represented the individual's present psychological world, which her past may have helped shape along with her present environment and others in her life. So while Gestalt psychology described perception, with Lewis' life space, he described the human behavior and motivation. According to him, may life space ang bawat isa, a psychological word na nasa kanya anuman ang kanyang gawin. Life space consists of person's goals, values, wishes, attitudes, and cognitive skills, and also her environment. So, cognitive field ay maaaring experience, frame of reference, point of view of a person na naapektuhan sa previous learning nito. Subalit, hindi kinonsider ni Lewin ang past experiences as a part of the life space. Dahil ang life space ay nagpapakita ng bawat individual na may psychological world na kung saan nakatulong doon ang past niya. Ang past kasi natin ay hindi naman gaanong nakakaapekto sa life space ng isang tao at naka-implied lamang iyon sa Lewin's theory. So, according to Lewin's theory, learning takes place when changes in the life space takes place as when we acquire new knowledge and change our point of view as a result. Vectors also include induce in learning. These are pressures that takes place in a person's life space due to the internal conflict or tension, such as when one is torn between two goals. So, according to Lewin, human behavior is shaped by the manner by which an individual reacts to a vector or essentially faces a problem. So Lewin's theory tells us that the learning takes change when the changes in the life space takes place, and it happened when we start to acquire the knowledge and when we change our point of view. So dito naman papasok yung vector na kung saan sinasama rin ito yung mga pinag-aralan natin. Dito na papasok yung mga bagay na nakakaapekto sa life space ng isang tao, especially when a person is torn between their goals. In practical terms, vector might come in the form of perceived problem. Lewin says that human behavior is shaped by the manner na kung saan ang bawat individual ay nagre-react sa vector or it faces the problems. Halimbawa, ang isang magsasaka ay gustong i-improve ang kanyang productivity pero ayaw niya namang mag-take ng risk. Doon na nagsisimula ang conflicts between the two values that creates vectors sa farmer's life space. That's how some individuals always tries to attain a balance in his/her life space. For practitioners, Lewin's theory point out that a person's life space affects how she learns. So, moving on, Lewin's theory for the practitioner points out that the person's life space where it affects how they learn, and the educational communicator must plan, treat, and impart his/her message para mag-fit ito sa life space ng kanyang mga audience. Importante ang bagay na yun dahil kapag ang communicator ay gusto niya na ang kanyang audience ay ma-accommodate ang kanyang messages, kailangan niyang i-maintain ang balance ng kanilang life space even though it's about their life space changes. The fundamental communication principle, know your audience, finds basis in Lewin's theory of learning. To be effective, a communicator must always empathize with his or audience, which means to consider their life spaces, their goals, needs, wishes, motivations, understanding, and the aspect their environment that affect them. The fundamental communication principle, know your audience, tells us or ibinigay nito ang basehan sa Lewin's theories of learning. Para maging isang effective communicator, kailangan ipalagi ipakita sa kanila o ikonsidera ang kanilang life spaces, and their life spaces includes their goals, needs, wishes, motivations, understanding, and aspect of their environment that affect them. Pero kailangan alam pa din namang communicators ng limitasyon ng kanyang audience, their capability, or even their resources. Lewin's theory further stresses the educational gains from repeating a message in several forms. Repetition helps put a message across, especially if it creates a vector. Sheer repetition, a person may change his/her goals and values and on the whole his/her life space. So Lewin's theory stresses the educational gains in repeating the message in several forms. However, the two repetition or the repeating messages is different from the repetition in the SR theories because it is pertained as the SR relationship. So Lewin's theory repetition is pertained to the solely representation of the stimulus where learning may change in covert behavior. So that is for my discussion, and the next topic will be discussed by the next two-parter.
Topic 3, Tolman's cognitive maps. Gestalt psychology describes perception, and Lewin's life space describes human behavior. Tolman's theory describes memory. According to Tolman, we learn ideas and behavior and help us attain our goals. The learner is goal-seeking, and his/her goals shaped with his/her behavior. Thus, in learning process, the organism remembers the stimuli. Tolman called this as signs, which lead to his/her goals. In his/her mind, a learner forms a pattern of relationship among signs and between signs and goals. This pattern of relationship is called a cognitive map, somewhat similar to a gestalt. Thus, Tolman's theory is sometimes referred to as the sign gestalt expectancy theory. Tolman's theory of learning resulted from a series of experiments with rats, which learned to find their way in a T-maze and a cross-maze. In one experiment, Tolman observed that rats that were seldom reinforced learned the routes to the end of a T-maze as well as the fully reinforced rats. This experiment showed latent learning to be as effective as reinforced learning. Tolman concluded that reinforced primarily serves to inform learners of the correctness of their response. To him, the satisfaction derived from the reinforcement is not the major factor that shaped learning, unlike in Skinner's contention. In another experiment, rats which had to find the correct route to the food at the end of a cross maze during every trial learned faster than those which merely had to turn left every time, regardless of which end they were first placed. The second experiment showed place learning to be superior to response learning. In other words, the rats learned the route inside the maze better than the response of turning left. The route contained the significant signs leading to the goal, which was the end of the maze where food was placed. Figure 1 is Tolman's maze, which he reinforced his rats. And figure 2 is reinforced learning, which has morning cue, tone cue, and soccer's chocolate, and other things. Because Tolman considered goals or expectations as important factors that shaping learning, his theory points out that educational communicators must relate the materials to be learned to the learner's goals. For example, lectures can capture the listener's interest and involvement in their topics by showing how the material is important in their daily lives or in future situations that they may encounter. Recognizing that learners are goal-seeking individuals, educational communicators must establish with their audience the goal of learning a material. Knowledge of such a goal or objective helps the learner to look for the significant signs or relevant information which can shape its behavior toward attaining the stated goal. Another way of establishing the goal of learning is to show the expected product of the start of learning. For example, a piano teacher can make learning a new piano piece easier for his or her student by playing the complete piece for the student before he/she fumbling with the keys, or an extension worker who shows his or former clients how an established as Zola propagation found looks like sets the goal in their learning the procedure of fund construction. Because we remember by forming cognitive maps in our minds, the educational communicator can also remembering easier for learners by providing them keys or patterns for remembering. For example, the acronyms RIGBIB, AIETA, and SMCRE provide us keys for remembering easily the light ways or arranged by wavelength, the steps in adoption process, the elements of the communication process, respectively. These acronyms become significant signs arranged as capsule maps that indicate the relationships among their elements. Thus, an audiovisual scriptwriter can help his or her viewers and listeners remember the message in a slide set, audio cassette, or video presentation if he/she provides them with similar keys of remembering. Topic 4. Functional Learning Principles. Mental set is a principle of perception that pertains to an individual's readiness to learn. A mental set may be defined by a learner's expectations in the learning situation as shaped by his or her prior experiences, prior instruction by a facilitator or teacher, attitudes, needs, and social norms. For example, previous knowledge about a terror instructor may create in the student a mental set that hampers his or her learning. The principle of mental set pinpoints the importance of preparing learners to respond in the appropriate way in the learning situation to create a conductive mental set. Educational communicators may perform any of the following steps. First, involve the learners in some activity among which they can draw observations and insights for discussions. For example, a trainer, teacher, or facilitator may lead a game, a role play, or types of experimental activities so that it can serve as a reference point for discussing concepts and principles afterward, and introduce the activity or material to be learned. A standard procedure in presenting audiovisuals is for presenter to give an overview of summary its contents first, or the presenter may state the objective of the presentation of his expectations of the learners. Guidelines for viewing and listening may also be suggested. Third, relate the message or learning task to familiar ideas and experiences. 4. Create a pleasant or positive attitude. 5th, catch attention. 6. Relate the message or learning task to the needs and goals of the learner. 7. Show how a message center may tell his audience what to pay particular attention to. This is to adequately prepare the learners to receive the information to be presented through audiovisuals, which cannot react to questions and reactions. Introductions are also important in other forms of communication, such as in public speaking and in script writing. In preparing an audience to learn, an introduction attempts to provide a smooth transition between the audience brain and mind, the communicator's message. Your learning task conforms to social norms. Learning by problem solving. Gagnon integrated the various learning theories by drawing up a taxonomy composed of 8 types of learning. Simplest type of learning is his taxonomy is signal learning, while the most complex is problem solving. Learning by problem solving is a creative process wherein an individual actively seeks way of dealing with an difficulty and in process arrives at new insights. The learner's high level of involvement makes this type of learning meaningful and long-lasting. Repetition is not important in this type of learning, but the effort and time required of the learners depends upon the complexity of the problem to be solved. Kingsley suggested 4 steps in directing and training learners in problem solving. First, set the stage for the problem by asking thought questions and by devising and assigning problem exercises. Second, assist learners in clarifying and defining the problem. Third, stimulate the fertility of suggestions for solutions and direct learners to sources of information based on the problem. Fourth, foster a critical attitude towards the suggestions so that they will be properly evaluated and tested before being finally accepted solutions. We outlined the steps in learning by problem solving, which Kingsley paraphrased as follows. First, a difficulty is felt. Second, the problem is clarified and defined. Third, a search for clues takes place. Fourth, various suggestions appear, are evaluated and tried out. Fifth, a suggested solution is accepted, or the thinker gives up in defeat. Sixth, the solution is tested. These principles find direct application in the advising of student research of theses in universities and in leading research studies and projects in research institutions. Other types of tasks that are best taught through problem solving might also these principles useful.
Topic number 5, cybernetic learning. The term cybernetics was coined by Wiener to refer to the study of a control mechanism. A control mechanism is a means to control the behavior of or within a process or system. There are many types of control mechanisms, but in human behavior, human decision making is a control mechanism made by an individual to start or delay a process in an attempt to keep or bring a process within a desired state. So applied to human behavior, cybernetic feedback theory views the individual as a system that regulates its functions and consequently adapts to his or environment based on the feedback he or she receives from such environment. So, to be exact, cybernetic feedback theory is the individual's ability to control his or her feelings, emotions, or behavior that he or she adapts on the environment. And mag-result yun sa feedback na kanyang na-receive from such environment. So Hill notes that cybernetic theory does not adequately describe learning, and like Lewin's life space, it only describes human behavior. So in cybernetic theory kasi when in terms of learning is about the information processes, while sa human behavior is all about the psychological aspect of an individual. The theory offers a useful guideline in educational communication for rural development, particularly in learning by problem solving. This is the principle of feedback, which is not necessarily equivalent to information and reinforcements in Skinner's operant conditioning and feedback as discussed in Berlow's communication theory. In cybernetic theory, feedback pertains to stimuli in a person's environment, some of which may be consequences of his or her own behavior, like failing grades. So, stimuli refers to the force or the cause that the person experience or the person encounter in that environment. And for example, sa human behavior is like yung failing grades. So, yung failing grades, it is the force, it is the cause na mag-result dun sa individual na magkaroon ng response or yung naging effect nito. Kung halimbawa, yung cause is failing grade. So, ang effect dun sa individual is he or she might improve her studying para makapasa siya in the next examination period. This stimuli affect the balance in the individual's system, causing her behavior or her body to regulate itself. Creating imbalance, some environmental feedback may present complex problems to the individual. Such problems may require more than simple self-regulation. In this case, the guidelines for learning by problem solving, as discussed earlier, would prove useful. So, yung last discussion, discuss yung learning by problem solving, and it is been said na when we create imbalances, merong environmental feedback na magpe-present sa atin ng mga complex problems. And these problems is hindi lang siya nag-require ng self-regulation or yung ability natin to control our emotions, the behavior, our feelings, but also nag-require din to ng problem solving for us also to learn from the problems that we've encountered. So resulting behavior changes would enable him or her to adapt to his or her environment. Thus, cybernetic theory suggests that communicators can play an important role in such situation by sensitizing their clients to those environmental feedback that are hampering development in their communities. However, it is also possible that in spite of feeling a difficulty, people are unable to identify their problem. This may be particularly true in development work where a web of problems may be hampering development in the community. So, community residents may not easily perceive the problems affecting them because they themselves may be part of these problems. One role of development workers is to train their clientele to read signals in their environments, which indicate problems or opportunities. Such channeling of feedback requires careful planning. For example, authentic voice clips and photographs may be shown to the rural audience to mirror themselves and enable them to perceive their situation realistically. In a detached manner, this implies that rural development workers themselves must be perceptive of the potentials and constraints of the feedback in the environments of their clientele. However, they must remain open to their clientele's own interpretations of these signals. topic number 6, learning principles for effective communication are run through. Educational communication practitioners will find the principles and guidelines based on learning theories useful in two types of tasks. First, in designing messages for the learning process, messages design includes planning, encoding, and treating the message. Second, in planning appropriate strategies for instructional situations or systems. Synthesizing and summarizing all the principles and guidelines discussed based on the concepts, principles, or theories presented, learning is most meaningful and long-lasting when it takes place voluntarily. So it has been said that if you are learning voluntarily, you will acquire the learning process, you will acquire the knowledge that you want in a long-lasting manner. However, on the other hand, when you learn forcefully, if you are forced to learn, probably you will not acquire the knowledge, or you will not learn because you are forced. Kahit sino naman, pag pinilit ka sa isang bagay, is pag hindi mo gusto, hindi mo talaga siya maisasabuhay. Second, through the learner's maximum involvement. This is when the learner is giving his best or his or her maximum level of involvement, and with that, learning is most meaningful and long-lasting when you give your all. Third, when it brings about compatible or interrelated changes in different behavioral domains. So these behavioral domains are cognitive, it refers to the intellectual skills. Affective, it involves feelings, attitudes, and emotions. Psychomotor, it includes physical movement, coordination, and use of the motor skills area. Thus, the learning theories provide guidelines not only for teachers, trainers, and extension workers, but also for educational media specialists. Instructional strategies includes interpersonal as well as mediated methods used to induce the learning process. The following guidelines may be observed in designing messages or in choosing strategies to enhance or induce learning. Letter A, learning by trial and error is not recommended. Kasi hindi natin ma-assure na yung correct behavior is mali-learn natin through that trial and error. However, kung ma-learn na natin yung correct behavior na yun, it may take too much time, too much effort, and other resources bago natin ma-achieve yun. Letter B, to elicit a desired response or behavior, present a new stimulus simultaneously and repeatedly with an old or familiar stimulus or with a positive response. This is the principle of association based on Pavlov's classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is learning through association and was discovered by Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. In simple terms, two stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or animal. For example, imagine nyo na may food, na may bell, and may dog. Sa first image, may food and the dog. The dog is starving when he saw the food. In the other picture, there's a bell ringing, but the dog is steady. He's not doing any behavior. He's just sitting and quiet. On the other picture, the food and the bell are combined. The food and the bell is together, and the dog starts to starve. And at least when that stimulus is repeated simultaneously, the dog starts to starve whenever he hears the bell ringing. So with that, the behavior becomes more automatic with each repetition. The fact that repeated presentation or information or items typically leads to better memory or leads to the better memory of the dog for the material. So dahil dun sa nagkaroon ng association yung bell and yung food, nagkaroon na ng better memory yung dog na every time na maririnig niya yung bell na mag-ring is tatatak agad sa isip niya na it's time for dinner, it's time to eat, or what. So yun yung tinatawag na simultaneously repeated with an older familiar stimulus na mag-i-elicit o mag-i-evoke dun sa desired response or behavior ng tao o ng hayop. Letter C, the message or the desired behavior or both must be repeated so that learning will take place. So as I said earlier, the message or the desired behavior or both must be repeated so that the learning will take place. This is the principle of repetition as suggested by Tom Dyke's law of repetition, Pavlov's classical conditioning, Skinner's operant conditioning, and Lewin's life space. 4. Learning must be a satisfying experience. So this is the principle of satisfaction as suggested by Skinner's operant conditioning and Tom Dyke's law of effect. So the following are the educational indicator that may consider in making learning a satisfying experience. So the first bullet says that a more satisfying response is learned faster than the less satisfying one. So the more that we are satisfied, the more we learn faster, and the less we satisfied, the less we learn. The next bullet says that the learner must experience satisfaction immediately after performing the desired behavior. So dapat yung learner na-experience niya agad yung satisfaction when he or she performing the desired behavior para mas ma-induce yung learning process kasi satisfied agad siya dun sa na-perform niya desired behavior. The next bullet says that a learner who needs to exert much effort, spends much time, or fulfills other requirements that are hard for him or her to fulfill will learn less likely than one who can attain the satisfying condition more easily. So satisfaction in all repetitions hastens learning, but also makes the desired behavior disappear faster once it ceases to bring satisfaction. On the other hand, satisfaction in only some of the repetitions makes learning gradual but long-lasting. So the more na nag-exert tayo ng effort, the more na nag-spend tayo ng much time and napipressure tayo dahil sobrang hirap or what, mas less yung natututunan natin kasi napipressure tayo. Hindi tayo satisfied. Though natapos natin siya, na-achieve natin siya, it still don't last kasi nga, mayroon pa ding mga drives na nag-interfere. However, if we are satisfied in just a snap, we are more likely to learn faster. Next is the frequency by which satisfaction follows the desired behavior affects learning. 5. The message or behavior to be learned must be singled out from competing messages or behaviors. This is one of the principles of habit strength. Habit strength is a function of the frequency with which an action has been repeated in a stable context and has acquired a high degree of habitual automaticity. 6. The learner must be informed or provided feedback about how his or her behavior or understanding conforms to the desired performance or intended message. So this is the Skinner's operant conditioning and Thomas' cognitive maps who suggest this principle. Kasi kahit sino naman, every learners wants someone who will give a feedback about how he or she do, if he or she is doing well, if mayroon bang dapat baguhin, and with that feedback, magkakaroon tayo ng mapagkakataon pa na mabago o magkaroon ng changes dun sa ginagawa natin para mas ma-achieve natin yung success or yung satisfaction. 7. In learning complicated skills or a series of desired behaviors, the learner must first master the specific behaviors that are part of the series and be able to easily incorporate the complete series in an overall routine. So these principles are suggested by the concept of chain learning. Chain learning is a training and development method based on human psychology. It follows the underlying idea that if a learner is made to reinforce skills in a sequence, it will enable the learner to learn more complex behaviors. So the more we learn or the more we master the sub skills first, the more that we can complete or we can easily incorporate in learning complicated skills because we've already know the sub skills that circulate these skills in which we can now complete the series in an overall routine more easily. Number 8, learning sessions must be timed and paced in such a way that drives will not interfere with making the learner perform the desired behavior. Examples of such drives that may interfere with learning are hunger and exhaustion. As suggested by Hall's drive reduction theory, short distributed practice is recommended for learning simple tasks that require repetition. So we must schedule or time ourselves in performing the desired behavior so that we can lessen the drives that will interfere our learning process. Number 9, skills are learned best through guided learning by doing. So this is suggested by Guthrie's contiguity theory. So contiguity is the principle that ideas, memories, and experiences are linked when one is frequently experienced with the other. For example, if you constantly see a knife and a fork together, they become linked or associated. So the more that we are learning, we are guided by learning as well as by doing, we are more likely to easily learn this learning process. Number 10, messages can be understood easily if they are well organized. So it was suggested by Gestalt Psychology, in organizing a message, the following tips are useful. Letter A, group or present similar or related ideas together in time or space. This is suggested by the principles of stimulus, generalization, and of similarity and proximity. So we are going to separate the who's similar or those who are related in ideas together so that we are able to identify the similarity as well as the proximity of these ideas. Letter B, use a consistent pattern of ideas or structure of different parts of a message. This is based on the principle of common movement. The Gestalt law of common fate states that humans perceive visual elements that move in the same speed and or direction as part of a single stimulus. A common example of this is a flock of birds. When several birds fly in the same direction, we normally assume that they belong to a single group. And so, we mentally tend to group together the groups who have the same trajectory. Letter C, in organizing a message, we must emphasize the important points. It is suggested, this is based on the principle of figure ground. Figure ground, as discussed earlier, is the perception that holds that we tend to separate images into figure or objects, and ground or background, they either stand out prominently in the front or recede into the back. Letter D, clarify ideas by pinpointing differences between them. So this is suggested by the principles of stimulus discrimination and of contrast. So basically, we are contrasting and differentiating the characteristics of these ideas. Letter E, present ideas completely, recapping with a restatement of the theme of a message or with a summary. This is based on the principle of closure. It states that people will fill in the blanks or will fill in blanks to perceive a complete object whenever an external stimulus partially matches that object. Even when we're missing information, we tend to make sense of our environment by filling in the gaps to see a complete object. So next, use smooth transitions between subtopics or parts of a message. We are now outlining the ideas. This is suggested by the principles of good continuity. It says that it holds that humans tend to perceive each of two or more objects as different, singular, or uninterrupted object even when they intersect. In other words, individuals tend to group together as well as organize curves, lines, and other forms that are found in similar directions. So as I said kanina, it's the time when we are outlining the subtopics, we are organizing the subtopics for us to easily understand or easily learn this message. Letter G, use a key that helps learners remember easily the various parts of a message. So this is the Tolman's theory on cognitive maps that suggests this pointer. So sa ating mga estudyante, every time na magkakaroon ng examination, we tend to remember the key points para in which that key points or yung parang clue na yun is yun yung magiging dahilan para maalala natin yung information na yun or yung ideas na yun pag siya ay naitanong or nabasa natin siya sa examination paper. So, yun yung sinasabi na in organizing a message, we need or we must use a key that will help us remember the various parts of the message, as well as in recitations, in memorizations. Importante itong using a key or a clue or a cues to help us remember it more easily. 11. A message or behavior to be learned must be relevant to the learner's goals, need, knowledge level, values, attitudes, and environment. So this is suggested further by Tolman's cognitive maps, as well as by Lewin's life space. So, syempre, the more we learn or the more the message or behavior is relevant on what we want, what our goals, our need, our attitudes, environments, the more na nag-associate siya dun sa kagustuhan natin, the more na na-adapt natin, or the more na nagle-learn tayo dun sa message o sa behavior na yon. Number 12, the learner must have a clear idea about the goals or end products of learning. So, before learning, we must know ano ba yung learning intended outcome nito, ano ba yung ma-acquire natin in the end, ano ba yung products ng ginagawa natin. 13, the learner must be adequately prepared to perceive a message or perform a desired behavior. So this is based on Thorndike's law of readiness and on the principle of mental set, such as readiness may be enhanced by the following pointers. First is before presenting a message, provide prior experience through related activities such as games, role plays, and simulations. So bago natin i-present yung message, isipin natin during reporting sa mga gantong bagay, especially sa online class, we tend to use icebreakers para ganahan yung class before starting the lesson, or giving the students such activities that is related to the message na i-present. Next, introduce the topic or task to be learned. So, very naman siya, self-explanatory. We must introduce the topic or we must introduce the message or the task na ma-acquire nila in that learning session. Next, relate the message or behavior to be learned with something familiar. So we students, lalo na sa mga discussion, gusto natin na nare-relate tayo dun sa bagay na yun, dun sa pinag-uusapan, kasi the more nakaka-relate tayo, the more na mas naiintindihan natin yung message or yung behavior na intended na dapat natin matutunan. Next is make the message intense or unusual or show contrast to catch attention. So yung message dapat hindi siya masyadong plain. Syempre dapat lagyan din siya ng mga unusual or intense thingy na magka-catch ng attention dun sa learners. Next, point out that the message or behavior to be learned is relevant to the learner's need. Next, assure learners that the message or behavior to be learned does not conflict with social and cultural norms. 14. To enhance a creative type of learning characterized by high learner involvement. So a facilitator can guide learners to solve problems systematically by following specific pointers. First, help learners identify, clarify, and define problems by themselves by posing thought questions and by providing them exercise on problem identification. Second, encourage learners to give suggestions for solving problems. Direct learners to sources of information bearing on the problem, and foster a critical attitude towards the suggestions so that learners can properly evaluate and test them before finally accepting solutions. And lastly, the last slide we will talk about the pointers that are based on Kingsley's guidelines on learning by problem solving. So 15, a facilitator who sensitizes learners to their environment helps them perceive problems that must be overcome as well as opportunities for solving this. Number 15 is the last guidelines that is based on the principle of cybernetic learning. So these guidelines for enhancing learning are not exhaustive, nor are they all necessary to apply in all learning situations. The educational communicator must be able to single out those guidelines that would enhance each particular learning situation in which he or she works. So, as a educational or EdCom practitioners, we must also understand these guidelines kasi it will also help us to enhance our learning situation where we work. And hindi naman siya nakaka-exhaust kasi lahat naman siya is apply natin in any learning situations, and based naman din dun sa mga discussions, it is relatable in any aspects of learning. We must understand these guidelines, we must understand every theories that is presented in the early discussions rather. Ito po ay necessary lalo na sa isang EdCom practitioner. Chapter Summary. Learning is defined as relatively permanent change in behavior, whether it is cognitive, affective, psychomotor, or interactive domains, or any combination of these. Learning is possible purpose or outcome of communication. However, not all communication may result in learning, as when the effective behavior change is only transitory. Learning gives us the ability to understand our own behavior. Studying uh, psychology will allow students to understand their own behavior, emotions, and ideas. They will also realize that studying the principles of psychology will allow them to assess, evaluate, and provide solutions to all unwanted emotional situations, as well as learning enhance our communication expertise and the ability to understand the behavior of other people. Such change in behavior is said to be relatively permanent because it must be held stable for some time. However, the learned behavior may change later as the person's learning continues in his or her lifetime. Stimulus response theories. Number 1. Thorndike's trial and error learning is the stamping out of incorrect behavior and stamping in of correct behavior. In practice, this type of learning is not recommended, as I said earlier, that correct behavior is not easily acquired in trial and error. However, kung ma-acquire man natin siya, ma-learn man natin yung correct behavior, it takes too much time, too much effort, and other resources bago natin ma-achieve yung correct behavior na yun. Number 2, Pavlov's classical conditioning states that we learn by associating new stimuli presented simultaneously and repeated trials. So as I've also said earlier, nasa Pavlov's classical conditioning, as I gave the example of the food, the bell, the association of food and the bell with the dog, that it states that the more we associate new stimuli more repeatedly or simultaneously, we have a better memory about that material in which we learn a new behavior. Number 3, stimulus generalization based on Pavlov's theory is the tendency of an organism to respond in the same way to similar stimuli. Number 4, Skinner's operant conditioning states that we learn behavior that repeatedly satisfies us. So we learn that behavior if that stimuli repeated more simultaneously and as well as makes us more satisfied. And feedback on correct behavior is considered to be satisfying. So totoo naman, whenever we get positive feedback, we satisfy most. But when there is a negative response, yeah, there's a possibility, there's a part that we are not satisfied, but it's our opportunity to enhance, to change something for a better result that will satisfy us in the next feedback that we will receive. Number 5, habit formation essentially involves learning SR change or a series of stimulus-response relationships that become repeated regularly in somewhat automatic fashion. Number 6, Hall's concept of drive reduction states that we learn more easily if the behavior helps reduce or satisfies our drives. Although this theory may not apply widely in all learning situations, it points out how drives such as hunger and fatigue can interfere with learning. Tulad na sabi ko kanina, we must time and pace in a way that there is no drive that will interfere in performing the desired behavior. And yung concept ng drive reduction is more easy siya kasi it will help us to reduce the drives and satisfy us the most. And ayun, hindi nga daw siya nagagamit in all learning situation, but it is also beneficial in reducing interference during performing the desired behavior. So the next presentation will be discussed by Ms. Lovely Rose Tappel.
To continue the discussion, Gutierrez continuity. Gutierrez states that one trial is sufficient for learning to take place as long as the response takes place immediately after or almost simultaneously as the stimulus is presented. In short, the theory espouses learning by doing with close supervision and guidance. So, Gutierrez continuity tells us that one trial is enough for us to learn. We all know that one mistake or one event that could turn our world upside down will make us realize a lot of things. That's how Gutierrez continuity wanted to tell us. Kadalasan kasi talaga sa mga tao, hindi madaling matuto kahit na paulit-ulit na ang nangyayari yun sa kanya. But then, there's still one instance that will open your eyes. Yun bang sa isang pangyayaring yun, marirealize mo na, ay oo, ganun pala dapat. So, next is the Gestalt psychology. So, Gestalt psychology assumes that the perception is the basis of learning and that such perception is the process by which we organize or see relationships among stimuli so that they make up a coherent whole. Gestalt psychology offers communicators 7 perception principles that essentially guide how a message ought to be organized. These are the principles of similarity, proximity, common movement, closure, good continuity, figure ground, and contrast. So, Gestalt psychology is about how we learn through our perceptions. So, ano nga ba ang perception? Just like what I discussed on my discussion before, perception is a process where it is organized. That's its relationship to make it a whole. It offers us the 7 perception principles that will guide us how the message is being organized. We have the similarity, which is the tendency of the perceiver to group the stimuli with similar characteristics. Next is the proximity, where the stimuli is presented close to each other in time or space. Another one is the common movement, where the stimuli moves in same directions. Under the separation are the following. Figure ground, ito ay nag-focus sa isang perception ng isang aspeto lamang. We also have the contrast na kung saan ito naman ay magkakaroon ng contrasting qualities within the size, shape, tone, color, pitch, and tempo. Next is the closure, where it fills the gaps and completes the stimuli that is incomplete to it. And last is the good continuity. So when we say good continuity, ito naman yung whole stimuli na sobrang close sa that isa, however, it losing their identities. So next is the Lewin's theory. So Lewin's theory states that learning takes place when changes in a person's life, space, or psychological world take place. Tolman's theory on cognitive maps contend that we learn and remember ideas and behavior that help us attain our goals. So let's move on with Lewin's theory. So Lewin's theory tells us na ang pagkatuto ay nangyayari kapag ang pagbabago sa isang individual ay nangyayari or mangyayari. Just like Gutierrez continuity, one unforgettable event that will happen in your life will change you and your whole existence. So Tolman's theory naman ay tungkol sa ating pagkatuto na nakukuha or nang ating natin sa memories or ideas from the past, our behaviors na tumulong sa atin na ma-achieve ang goals natin sa buhay. Next, mental set is a principle of perception that pertains to an individual's readiness to learn. Learning by problem solving is the creative process in which an individual actively seeks ways of dealing with the difficulty, and the process arrives at insight. Let's move on with the mental set. This is individual's perception that is ready to learn. Madalas gawin natin itong biro, mindset ba? Kung saan tinutukoy natin dito is yung bagay na nagawa natin na hindi natin aakalaing maaari pala. Parang mental set nga, we set our goals, we did the thing because we are ready to learn and we are ready to be taught while also teaching. Learning. Alam natin lahat na kapag gusto natin matuto ay gagawa tayo ng paraan para mangyari ito. Probably by the past experiences, listening, our perceptions, and also it would definitely an event that change our life. Cybernetic learning is a process by which an individual or group adapts to his or environment based on feedback from it, and enhancing such adaptive learning through a cybernetic or feedback generating system. The educational communicator may provide mechanisms by which intended development participants can perceive feedback on development problems. So, let us move on with the cybernetic learning, na kung saan natututo tayo or nakaka-adapt tayo sa isang bagay or sa isang lugar base sa mga nalalaman natin sa lugar na iyon. Halimbawa, sa isang grupo, lahat sila rich kid, tapos ikaw purita lamang. Para makaayon ka sa kanila, gagaya ka, even though you know it will be hard for you and maybe in the end, you will suffer from it. Para naman matuto tayo maka-adapt through the cybernetic or feedback generating system, ang isang educational communicator must provide mechanisms or techniques para sa development ng isang individual kung saan ipiperceive nito ang feedback development problems nito or para naman maiwasan ito. So, that's it for our Team 4 group discussion. I hope you learned from our discussion for today. And to formally end this, I want to leave a quote about this lesson. Always remember that there are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are doors of perception. Thank you for listening and have a good day and God bless.